John
Hello.
DiNardo, welcome to Late Night in the Midlands. How are you, my friend?
Hi, Michael. I'm fine. Very
Uh,
good.
it's great to have you back, and we are live right now. And I'm about a minute early, so I guess I didn't catch you too early. But I thank you for jumping on with us at such short notice.
Oh,
Uh,
you're welcome, Michael. I'm happy to be with you whenever you need me.
Well, thank you, because tonight our original guest, it was supposed to be about coming catastrophes and different Earth changes. So I thought, well, what better person to replace that with when somebody who knows a whole lot about this stuff. So uh, I'm glad to have you here tonight. And I guess first off, we could start out with the weather. What is going on?
So, seen it over and over repeatedly, all sorts of bizarre and extreme weather. Uh, for example, softball-sized hail, baseball-sized hailstorms, windstorms that are extremely high velocity, winds that frequently approach and exceed hurricane force, which is 74 miles an hour or greater. And we see that straight line windstorms at these high wind speeds, hurricane wind speeds, and in the form of what the weatherman called derecho. A derecho is a wide area windstorm, numerous states before, such as a haboob. A haboob is a dust storm where the clouds of dust rise up to maybe 1,000 feet or so, and just blanket an entire city, so that their visibility is very poor and virtually zero. And those are just examples of bizarre weather events that we've been seeing that have never occurred before or have rarely occurred in recorded history. We're seeing, as you see, record epic cold spells, breaking records constantly. I mean, in the South, records are being smashed, and throughout the country, at least east of the Mississippi, records are being smashed for cold weather. Um, we know that Earth is in trouble. It's obvious to anyone, even a person who is not studying weather or is not studying the solar system. That person should recognize, if he's been around his planet long enough, that this is not the normal weather that we knew when we were children, where you have relatively mild temperate weather during the spring and the summertime. Summertime it gets warm, but it's relatively stably warm. You don't see, you never used to see great excursions of temperature over a short period of time when we were young, 20, 30 years ago. Um, Now you see temperature changes of 40 degrees in a matter of hours.
Yeah.
So everyone should know that something's wrong with the Earth, even if they don't want to know about Planet X or they don't want to know about the solar system. They've got to sit up and take notice and start asking questions. Because, for example, if a person has physical maladies, problems, pains in parts of their body, or some kind of abnormal condition, they should check it out and investigate, because it's a symptom, an indication that something is wrong with their body. And if they do not attend to it and correct the problem, they could die or their life could be seriously impaired. Likewise, when we see our planet in ill health, going through trauma and convulsions constantly. Incidentally, can you hear me? Am I speaking clearly enough?
Oh, yes, you're perfect
Okay.
tonight.
I've got a better phone this time. I made the mistake of using an old-fashioned phone, thinking that older is better. Well, not with the old phones. But anyway, I'm glad that it's coming through
Me too.
clearly
I
now.
appreciate that. That's yeah. We're great. Sounds awesome.
Good. Uh, so we've got to investigate. Now, what I have studied since the year 2002, and many other people, scientists such as James McCanney and researchers such as Mark Hazelwood and Jason Rand, another researcher who's written a book titled The Return of Planet X, Gilbert Erickson, and there's so many people now. Bob Fletcher is another investigator, has been speaking about Planet X quite a bit. So there are numerous people talking about this problem. This is Earth. We're talking about something that is so great in magnitude, a threat that makes the New World Order look like an anthill. That's how that's how colossal this problem is. The approach of Planet X. Well, I can tell you from research that I've done uh, in looking back into past uh, events 32 years ago, the New York Times published a report regarding a celestial body which NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, long has termed Planet X. They've given it the name Planet X since famous astronomer Percival Lowell gave it this name back in 1910 when they were searching for a planet, a distant planet whose gravitational pull was being observed on the outer planets. And I'm going to read you this article from the New York Times, January 1983, nearly a third of a century ago, when they actually cited it. They were actively looking for it. They actually developed a space telescope designed specifically to sight and detect this object. That's how important and how great the concern was within the scientific community of the United States government
Okay.
about this object, Planet X, that they went through the trouble of developing the infrared astronomical satellite. And here's the article. I'm reading right from a photocopy that I got of this article from my library, January 1983, titled Clues Get Warm in the Search for Planet X by John Noble Wilford, New York Times. Quote, something out there beyond the farthest reaches of the known solar system seems to be tugging at Uranus and Neptune. Some gravitational force keeps perturbing the two giant planets, causing irregularities in their orbits. The force suggests a presence far away and unseen, a large object that may be the long-sought Planet X. Evidence assembled in recent years has led several groups of astronomers to renew the search for this 10th planet. They are devoting more time to visual observations with the 200-inch telescope at Mount Palomar in California. They are tracking two Pioneer spacecraft now approaching the orbit of distant Pluto to see if variations in their trajectories provide clues to the source of the mysterious force. And my comment is what they're talking about is Pioneer 10 and 11 were sent up specifically to see if there would be a gravitational pull upon these two one of the space probes, Pioneer 10. They sent it up to near distant Pluto, just as the article mentions, so that it would get near enough to their calculation of where Planet X was, that Planet X would actually exert a significant or detectable gravitational pull on this Pioneer 10 space probe and would thus pull it off of its trajectory somewhat, and that would give them proof that indeed this object is where they had calculated it to be. And sure enough, they did. They don't report on findings that they consider to be secret, and to them, to the government, everything is secret. You know that.
Well,
They
yeah, and
take our money and they go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I was just talking about a story in the beginning of the show where they said that the this spacecraft that they had sent up there to get the best pictures they've ever got of Pluto. They say, things that even Hubble can't do. They say they're now finding moons around Pluto. So you got to wonder: is there just another solar system sitting back there?
Well, yes. I mean, in the area of the region of Pluto, where they're approaching the Kuiper Belt area, and that is, there's so many millions of celestial bodies out there, asteroids and small comets. It's really it's quite understandable that they would see moons around Pluto, because Pluto, even though it's a small planet, has enough gravitational force to pull or attract any passing asteroids into its gravitational grip
But
and keep them captured, and thus they would become captured moons of Pluto.
isn't
So
it
yeah,
isn't it
but
strange how like Neptune, they say something's been tugging on it, and tugging on these outer planets, and they say they Pluto don't account for that. So what's doing it?
that's right. I mean, Pluto is so small that it's like it's there's no way that Pluto, with its small size, could exert any kind of gravitational pull on the larger planets. Actually, it would be just the opposite. The outer planets would pull on Pluto. It's always the larger planet that remains stable, and when it comes in proximity with a smaller planet, it's the smaller planet that gets moved, and the larger planet remains pretty much stable. It's like a big guy fighting a little guy,
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite visual, the relationship. Well, anyway, you're right. If any large outer planets, these are large gas giants, Uranus and Neptune. It takes quite a bit of gravitational pull to move them out of their orbits. And ever since, well, the article is going to go on to say it more eloquently than I could say it.
Okay.
And that is, I'll continue where I left off. We noticed that we mentioned that Pioneer 10 had indeed, even though the government keeps it secret, we have reports that indeed Pioneer 10, its trajectory was budged. It was moved, perturbed out of its trajectory slightly as it passed the calculated point where the scientists, astronomers, and astrophysicists had determined that Planet X was located. So that gave them proof that indeed this gravitational body was out there when the Pioneer 10 passed by Pluto. And I'll continue reading here. They're hoping that a satellite-borne telescope launched last week will detect heat signatures from the planet or whatever it is out there. This is the infrared astronomical satellite. It was boosted into a 560-mile high polar orbit Tuesday night. We're talking January 1983 now, this article. It was boosted into a 560-mile high polar orbit Tuesday night from Vandenberg Air Force Base, California. It represents an $80 million venture by the United States, Britain, and the Netherlands. So here we have three nations very much interested in this unseen massive object out there. So interested that they got together, the Netherlands, the U.S., and Britain, and developed this infrared astronomical satellite specifically to spot this object. In the next 6 or 7 months, the telescope is expected to conduct a wide-ranging survey of nearly all the sky, detecting sources not of ordinary light, but of infrared radiation, which is invisible to the human eye and largely absorbed by the atmosphere. Scientists thus hope that the new telescope will chart thousands of infrared emitting objects that have gone undetected: stars, interstellar clouds, asteroids, and with any luck, the object that pulls at Uranus and Neptune. So they're saying, yeah, they're secondary celestial bodies that they're interested in seeing with this infrared astronomical satellite, but the main object is Planet X, the large, what they believe is a dwarf star. I'll continue reading.
Okay.
The last time a serious search of the skies was made, it led to the discovery in 1930 of Pluto, the ninth planet. But the story begins more than a century before that, after the discovery of Uranus in 1781 by the English astronomer and musician William Herschel. Until then, the planetary system seemed to end with Saturn. As astronomers observed Uranus, noting irregularities in its orbital path, many speculated that they were witnessing the gravitational pull of an unknown planet. So began the first planetary search based on astronomers' predictions, which ended in the 1840s with the discovery of Neptune almost simultaneously by English, French, and German astronomers. So anyway, the article goes on, and it's what we're seeing in this article, what we're learning is that for nearly 200 years, astronomers have observed gravitational perturbations or disruptions in the orbital smoothness of the outer planets. And so this has been going on for so long, for nearly 2 centuries. How long does it take for a big object, a massive object, to be pulled in? Well, it's difficult with our concepts of space and time that we live with on this planet. It's difficult for us to understand. These are my comments now. I'm no longer reading. I've interrupted my reading of the article.
Yeah.
But consider the vastness of the solar system. We see diagrams of it, and it looks like all the planets are sort of, in close concentric circles going around one another, around the sun. However, someone gave an analogy one time, which was really amazing, when I was in college. And they said that if you had a fly in New Jersey, a bug, flying in New Jersey, in a point in one particular spot in New Jersey, the next planet out, Venus, for example, would be in Ohio. There would be another bug in Ohio, and that would represent the two planets and the distance between them, the two, consecutive planets, Venus and Earth. So that's how vast the solar system is.
Fascinating.
And that's why go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, I say fascinating. And went over a story last night that I had come across where scientists now say that some 70,000 years ago they now have proof. And what this does for me is it shows that this can happen. They have proof now that 70,000 years ago a brown dwarf star, a little sun, passed within, they said, I think it was a million, was it 100 light years away or something like that? But it passed by fairly close.
Right. Did it say light years or
Eh,
astronomical units?
I think it said light years. I don't have it in front of me right
Oh,
now,
okay.
but
Well,
they did say that the people on Earth, if there were people on Earth at the time, that they wouldn't have realized it went by. Now that I don't believe.
well, you know what? When they say light, like 100 light years, that's a long distance away. A light year is the distance
Oh, it
that
was
light.
a light year. That's what it was. 1 light year away, they said.
Well, even 1 light year, that's the distance that light would travel in 1 year. Well, it takes 8 minutes for the light from the sun to reach the Earth. That's 93 million miles. We'll say 100 million miles. Light travels. It takes 8 minutes for light to travel 100 million miles just about.
Wow.
Well, 1 light year, how many, a year is much, much longer than 8 minutes. So just imagine how far light could travel in 1 year. That's quite a distance away, a light year. Now, what that is, what's happening, Michael, and I'm glad you brought that up. You see, Mark Hazelwood, one of the first, really the first guy, he was the landmark pioneer to talk about Planet X, and he wrote the book Blindsided. Planet X passes in 2003. Well, we know he was way, way ahead of his time. But the point is, Mark did a great job with that book. It opened everybody's eyes to the existence of this incoming dwarf star. But what Mark had said in one of the interviews that I have on my radio broadcast, Planet X in Bible Prophecy, and I play it on my, rotating on my weekly radio broadcast, but shortwave radio. Mark said what's going to happen is when this object starts getting close, the powers that be are, because they want to keep the public unaware of this object because of how it would affect the economy. It would affect the power elite and their grip on society if we knew that was something massive was coming in. Obviously, it affects their money and affects their control over us. Mark said what they're going to do is they're going to hit you with all kinds of stories about objects that are out there, but don't worry, they're not too close. It's a huge object, but don't worry, it's so far out, it's a light year away, and people are going to get so jaded and bored and uh, just disinterested in these object stories, these numerous stories that will be deliberately floated by the power elite in their mass media, that they'll just turn away and just shut their eyes and close their minds to the incoming dwarf star that's going to change this world. That's the whole purpose of it, to get people bored with the subject. And that's why you're hearing all of these stories about massive planets coming in, not coming in, but being seen uh, so far away that they're not a threat. You'll never hear a story, or haven't heard one yet anyway, in the mass media that talks about an object that's coming dangerously close to Earth. They don't want that. They don't want
Only
people to know that.
only if it's an asteroid. They'll tell us, but they'll tell us after it's passed.
That's right. That's right. And even with asteroids, they won't even tell you that. I mean, so many times they have kept the secret, the passing of asteroids. I can tell you one event like happened in 2013, which they could not keep secret, and that was the meteor strike in Russia, which was very devastating. Well, that meteor was just one of the bodies that was being dragged in by an asteroid. That asteroid was reported, and even on the Weather Channel, I was surprised to see that reported, because they don't like to panic the public. They want to keep it secret.
Yeah.
But the Weather Channel and even the other news agencies were talking about an asteroid coming dangerously close to Earth. That, I believe, was around or February of 2013. And boy, I tell you, the lies become so conspicuous sometimes, because
Yeah.
what they said,
I
they
would.
said,
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say that, yeah, I agree with the asteroid bringing that meteorite in. I just thought it was strange how the mainstream media never, connected the two.
oh yeah, you're right, absolutely, they lied. In fact, even Al Roker on the Weather Channel, I'll always remember this, where Al Roker had to read his cue cards and say that, oh, this meteor that struck Russia had nothing to do with the asteroid that just passed Earth yesterday. And even Al ad-libbed and joked and said, yeah, sure, right. It had nothing to do. The asteroid had nothing to do with that meteor strike, right?
Yeah.
Really sarcastically. And so it's obvious to anyone that that meteor strike was a result of this asteroid. And the asteroid is a fairly large body, and of course it has a gravitational pull. So as it comes in from the asteroid belt, which is just beyond Mars,
Mhm.
it's going to drag in smaller bodies with it. I mean, this is basic physics. So you always have a cluster or a gang of these, an asteroid with some smaller meteors surrounding it. And when the asteroid passes by, what happens? It gets close enough to Earth, and Earth is so much larger than the asteroid, that Earth's gravitational pull rips away some of those accompanying bodies with the asteroid, from the asteroid, and pulls them to Earth. And sure enough, if you read the news reports from January of 2013, you'll see that there were a number of meteor strikes on planet Earth, all on that same day, that the Russian meteor strike occurred. There was another meteor strike in Cuba or near Cuba, and there were several others reported too. So this was part of a gang of captured objects from the gravitational grip of this asteroid. And we're seeing more and more of them. And as James McCanny had said a number of years ago, one of these days there's going to be an asteroid with our name on it. And it's only It's only statistically under, natural and understandable that as this object, Planet X, gets closer and closer because it's being pulled in by the sun, there's no way for it to be to escape. Just as, for example, there's no way for those meteors to escape. Once Earth's gravitational field begins to suck those meteors in, there's no way those meteors are going to fly back out again away from Earth. They're just inexorably destined to strike or to come into Earth and either burn up when they get close enough from the air friction of the atmosphere, or strike the planet itself. So likewise, on a larger scale, take that same principle of inexorable gravitational pull and apply it to our sun, which is the big guy, the really big gravitational magnet out there. Our sun is 300,000 Earth masses. So let's say, for simplicity of speech, that our sun is 1/3 of a million Earth masses. It's pulling in this relatively small object of 1,000 Earth masses, which NASA has called Planet X. So the big guy, 1/3 of a million Earth masses, our sun, is pulling in this smaller object of about 1,000 Earth masses, Planet X. As it gets closer, Planet X itself has an entourage that it has captured within its gravitational field. That gravitational field is many, many millions of miles in diameter, because this object comes in from deep space. It had come in, it had approached the outer bounds of our solar system, and it had fallen within the fringes of Earth's gravitational force field. And once being attracted, I got something in my throat here.
No, I understand. It happened.
It's like one of those little pollen, I guess, a piece of pollen. Once it's being attracted in there, there's no way for it to come back, for it to escape. So that's what happened. What happens with this object? But as it's traveling and approaching planet Earth from deep space, there are millions, literally millions, countless, many millions of objects floating around out there, especially in the Oort belt. The Oort belt, spelled OORT, they've never actually seen it because it's so far out, but they can see, they have other ways, indirect ways of detecting the Oort belt. This Oort belt you can visualize it as a sphere surrounding our entire solar system, a huge sphere way out there, comprised of gnats, like tiny little gnats all flying around. On a summer night, you've seen these gnats, and they go in tiny little circles, rapid circles all around, flying around your head. Well, just imagine gnats, a great, field of bodies, much more dense than the gnats you've ever observed flying around your head. And these are all comets. And what has been found in the Oort belt is they've detected comets that have come in and that seem to follow not the random pattern of gnats that you would see flying around your head, but they follow the pattern, intelligible, detectable pattern of an object that's coming in and gravitationally pulling these comets in a string, in sort of a trail. If I'll give you an analogy, a visual analogy, if you had on your kitchen table, if you were to evenly sprinkle some iron filings all over your kitchen table, and then if you were to take a large, powerful magnet and guide that magnet across the top of your table, what would happen is that iron filings would be pulled in a trail toward the magnet, and the closest iron filings would be sucked into the magnet, and the magnet would create a pathway of emptiness where those iron filings had been. And that's the kind of pattern that they were seeing in the Oort belt, very far out beyond Earth's outer bounds in that sphere of comets known as the Oort belt. They saw an intelligible pattern of comets. They called it non-random pattern. This is evidence right there. Scientist Dr. John Matisse of the Louisiana State University and another scientist who was independently studying the same thing in England, Dr. John Murray at the Open College in London. Both of these men observed the same phenomena, even though they were working far away and independent from one another, and that is non-random movements, intelligible movements that indicated there was some gravitational body moving these comets in the Oort belt. So that's pretty good evidence right there, and that was recorded in Mark Hazelwood's book Blindsided. Well, as this object gets close and it's inexorably coming in, what's going to happen, as I was saying before, is that this field of asteroids that it's dragging in is going to get denser and denser, because you can visualize an object. It's a large object, and it's so big that it acts like a gravitational magnet. As it in its field of many, many millions of miles in diameter, in its gravitational grip, so to speak, most of the comets, the denser comets that are surrounding it, are going to be very dense. There's going to be many of them per unit volume or per unit distance. But as you get further out, the density of these comets will be lesser and lesser. There will be more and more sparse. Well, as the object gets closer, the denser portion of its gravitational entourage, cometary entourage, is going to get closer to us. So now we're going to see more comets.
So let me
more
ask
asteroids as it gets closer.
Let me ask you this, John, before we take our break. And you can answer this after the break. But about where would this object be estimated to be now? And again, you can answer when we come back from the break, so you could give a little more detail on it. And you know, what kind of time frame might we be looking at where, you know, people can actually say, hey, there it is. But we'll get to that when we come back. Folks, this is Late Night in the Midlands on the LNM Radio Network, on the Dark Matter Radio Network, K98 Talk, High Point Radio, 100.5 FM, 1700 AM. And folks, we're going to be back in just a moment. We'll take calls too. If you've got questions or comments, one of two ways you could.
And I do have some people, one of whom is Gilbert Erickson, who does a lot of research on the position of Planet X based upon the late great Dr. Robert S. Harrington's calculations. Dr. Robert S. Harrington, I guess it's worthwhile to spend a little bit of time to explain the story about Dr. Robert S. Harrington.
Absolutely.
This man was one of the eminent astronomers in the world back in the 1980s and early 1990s, and he had devoted his career. He was the chief astronomer of the United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., and Dr. Robert Harrington devoted the latter part of his career to the search for Planet X, picking up where Percival Lowell, the great astronomer in the early 1900s, had left off. And Dr. Harrington had done extensive computer calculations of the entire sky, the entire southern sky where this thing would be located. In fact, the entire surrounding sky around planet Earth in the celestial hemisphere, and he had determined that there's only one area where it could be, and that is below the ecliptic plane. The ecliptic is, if you can visualize a CD on being rotating and being played, just like a phonograph record of the old days, a CD rotating. Well, that's what our solar system is except that the CD is invisible. It's an invisible disk, huge, colossal, cosmic disk in space with the sun at the center of this CD disk and planets revolving around the sun, gravitationally captured, and in orbit around the sun. We've all seen diagrams of our solar system, and the ecliptic plane is that invisible disk in space on which all the planets revolve around the sun. Well, Dr. Harrington found from his calculations based upon the gravitational perturbations of the outer planets, he saw that Uranus and Neptune were being pulled downward in one particular point in their huge orbital revolution around the sun. And so he knew that there was something down below the ecliptic plane. And he estimated that it was coming in at an angle of about 40 degrees to the plane. So I'm going to try to give you a visual, something that you can really depict in your mind visually,
Okay.
to understand how this thing is, where it's at, and then try to go on to describe where it might be right now.
All right,
If
great.
you were in a restaurant, you've seen a Chinese restaurant or some other large restaurant where they have these large circular tables. And imagine that that circular table is the invisible disk in space, which we call the ecliptic. And if you were to put a bright lamp at the very center of that table, that lamp would represent our sun. And if you were to place, say, a grape very close to the close to the center lamp of that table, that might represent Mercury. And if you were to take a walnut and move it further out away from the center, that might represent Venus. And another small object, such as a cranberry, it might represent planet Earth. Or Earth is actually larger than Venus and larger than Mercury, but they're all relatively small planets. And further out, you might put a grapefruit, which would represent Jupiter. And that would be further out on the table. But all these objects would be on the table. Now visualize something that doesn't normally happen in a restaurant, and that is the table is revolving very slowly. That's the way our planets revolve around the sun. Now, if you were to expand that visual image in your mind and imagine yourself on the floor, off to the side of the table, and if you were to take a slingshot, for example, and shoot a large ball bearing, up toward the underside of the table, from the side of the table, but from the floor, going up toward the underside of the table, that would be the sort of the trajectory of Planet X as it's coming in, being
Oh,
pulled in. Of course, it's understandable that any incoming object doesn't have to come in right in the same plane as our ecliptic disk. It can come in from below or from above or anywhere. And it just happens to be coming in from the south at a 40-degree angle to the table. So the line of trajectory of that ball bearing if you draw a line in your mind's eye of that trajectory of the ball bearing shooting toward the underside of the table, and then you look at the line of the underside of the table itself, that would form a triangle, and the angle of that triangle would be the 40-degree angle that Dr. Harrington is referring to, which he estimated is the angle of Planet X's incline or approach to our ecliptic plane. Now, as to where it is right now, I have to tell you furthermore that what would happen if you look at it from basic physics principles of gravitation, this object does not hit the sun. It has come in many times before in the past, and if it ever had hit the sun once before, it would have been destroyed. And that has not happened. It has always looped around the sun. And the reason is that Mark Hazelwood had found in his research is that there is a repulsion force when you have objects that are very large and they get very close together. The gravitational pull between them actually becomes a gravitational repulsion, and that's what prevents them from crashing into one another. So this object, rather than crashing into the sun, will actually loop around the sun. But what's going to happen now? Visualize this ball bearing coming up toward the other side of the table, and it's going to overshoot the center of the table where the center lamp is, the sun. It's going to overshoot that, and when it does, it's being pulled in by the sun. It's not really, it's not really being, that's where the analogy ends. It's not actually being fired, but it's being pulled in by the sun. And when it overshoots and goes too far beyond the center of the table, still at the underside of the table, it begins to it loses its velocity and its momentum, because it's now being pulled backward by the sun. That lamp at the center is pulling backward on it, causing it to decelerate, and eventually it changes direction. Well, it does it in a circular way because it's a vector quantity. It has both speed and direction. And the pullback by the sun on this overshooting dwarf star, planet X, the pullback every instant in time, if you think about it and visualize it, as it pulls back, it changes the direction, the straight line direction of it, so that it never does go in a straight line. It gets changed gradually so that it turns just like you would make a U-turn in your car. If you were traveling down a highway, you'd have to slow down and make a very sharp U-turn and go slow enough that you won't go flying off the road. Well, this object is sort of like a car slowing down and making a U-turn. And of course it slows down, as I said, because it's being pulled backwards now, and it's losing its directional velocity, and it's changing direction and being caused to slow down and make a turn around the sun itself. And eventually, now it hasn't happened yet, but eventually that object is going to be pulled backward enough that it's like a slingshot. Like, David, the biblical story of David and Goliath, where he had this stone in his sling, in the pouch of his sling, and he whirled it over his head many times to build up the momentum, and then released the stone to fly toward Goliath and strike Goliath between the eyes. Well, that's what happens with this large planet. In fact, NASA has done that with some of their space modules. To return them back to Earth, they would slingshot around the moon, for example, to come back to Earth.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's going to happen with this object, but it hasn't done it yet. It's in the beginning of its U-turn right now.
And John, I gotta say that is the best description that anybody's given to me to date. I mean, because I could totally picture that table in the restaurant with all these things on it, and this ball bearing coming from the bottom on an angle. I mean, really, I have good visuals, so I understand pretty well of how that takes place. But now, I mean, when though? Do we know how
Well,
long?
well, okay. Now it's very difficult because NASA knows, because they have all the best facilities that our tax money can buy, and have all the best scientists and astronomers and astrophysicists that our tax money can buy. So they have an idea, and they're tracking it with space telescopes. So they pretty much know where it is right now, but it's going to be a very tightly held secret. We common folk have to discern various clues. And Gilbert Erickson is going back to using Dr. Harrington's original calculations as to the direction from which it's coming, and the angle of its approach and all that. And he estimates that and I have to go by his estimation, although again, he's just a common, ordinary guy doing research. So we have to keep our eyes open and look for any flaws in his theory. But he estimates that it's out somewhere beyond, in this area of Saturn, still below the ecliptic plane, but coming up to the ecliptic plane. Now, what I have done to try to determine its position is to look at some of the anomalies that may be occurring on the outer planets, because I know this object from basic physics has overshot the sun For example, we saw when it was under the sun, when it came under that table and was below the center of the table, Earth was, I suspect, I surmise that Earth was undergoing many traumas, such as earthquakes, for example. A large number of earthquakes were occurring around 2009, 2008 to 2010. We had massive earthquakes in New Zealand, in Iran, all over the world. We had
No,
massive earthquakes.
2011 too. We had the Japan earthquake.
The Japan earthquake in March, right? March 3rd of 2011, we had the huge Chilean earthquake, and around that time. So, and now the earthquakes again. I've been sort of negligent because I haven't been plotting the graphs of the frequency and magnitudes of earthquakes over the last several years. So I really don't know, and I can only go by what I've been hearing lately, and incomplete, unstudied uh, observations, and that is that the earthquakes seem to have lost their intensity since around 2011, and that tells me that this object has overshot and gone out further out toward the outer planets, and it has probably coming up. It must be coming up close to the ecliptic, but some of the telltale signs would be weird things happening with Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus. And we've seen all these weird things happening already. We have seen Jupiter, for example, around a few years ago, lost its belt. There's a belt, swirling belt around Jupiter.
Yeah.
It lost that belt for a period of time and then it gained it back. Well, that told me that something was gravitationally and electromagnetically pulling on Jupiter, doing something to Jupiter to cause it to lose its belt, because Jupiter is largely a gas planet. It doesn't have a lot of mass. Much of it is gases swirling around. And when there are gravitational and electrical forces on gases, gases are ionic in many cases, they're electrified. And when some incoming object begins to gravitationally and electromagnetically affect the Jupiter, then you could conceivably see changes in the belt, in the swirling motion of the gases, which is the belt. And also the eye on Jupiter, that whirlpool eye, changed or disappeared. Another thing that happened was Saturn had a weird hexagonal pattern that occurred, and I think Mike Adams of Natural News had put out a report about that too. And we should check that out. I should do more research, but there was a hexagonal pattern on the North Pole of Saturn. Why that would happen, I don't know. I know there's, and I don't want to get, I should attend to the subject of some supernatural things that are going on too, regarding the Satanists who are in our establishment, the ruling elite who control NASA. Of course, they control the government, doing satanic things in space, and who knows what's going on there. I know they had the crash into Jupiter of Galileo, or not crash, but they sent something up there. They sent Galileo up there to observe Saturn, and I think I'm getting it correct. There was another one that was sent up for Jupiter too.
Yeah, and I even heard them discussing about igniting Saturn at one time. This wasn't too long ago. They were talking about hitting it with nukes to ignite it.
Right, and that's crazy. That doesn't make sense unless you're dealing with a bunch of maniacs, people who are satanically obsessed. Because, Saturn, the name Saturn is derived from the name Satan. And this is all Satan worship. That's what these people do, the elite. The ruling elite, and many of us have studied this. David Icke has studied it, many others, Tom Horn, and people you know of, who have studied the satanic references and the satanic worship that goes on between the power elite who rule this world and who own and operate NASA and the outer planets. They in space they do these. I've Tex Mars has done an expose of some of the satanic experiments that have been done through NASA uh, by the power elite because they expect some kind of celestial introduction of Satan into this world. And we know, again, I'm glad that you deal with the subject so that your audience understands what I'm talking about. But many scientists believe that there are other dimensions, and
Yeah.
those dimensions can be accessed through wormholes or through black holes in space. Highly massive bodies that create such a gravitational whirlpool that they actually take you into a different time warp, time dimension. And that's where we believe, and spiritually and biblically, we have some indication that angels, fallen angels, or God's loyal angels, come through another dimension. Stop and think about how does God? God is with us. God is a spirit that is with all men. He created humankind. So why is it that we cannot see him? It must be another dimension. He must be present that we cannot see him. Yet we cannot see him. So likewise with angels. Angels have been observed by people at various rare times when they have come and saved lives. Many people have cases. In fact, I was one of them whose life was saved on the highway by God in a miraculous automobile accident. So we know of the presence of angels. There are too many reports by too many people to discount it as myth or imagination.
And you know,
So
John,
there's another dimension.
I definitely think that there's other dimensions, and you know, I sound like a broken record sometimes, but I got to say this because you brought up God, and you know, I've always seen God as is so big that we can't see him. That's why we can't see him. And it's not a him or a her, but it's the universe. I think that's God. I think it creates, it destroys. It's like that's the body, and we're within it.
Right. And God must have a spirit and a mind and a set of principles because, look, when you think about it, I mean, we were created. We're such a marvelous machine. I mean, I don't even don't have the time to go into the details, but if you just look at the human hand and how it's so functional, you can do anything with the human hand, and all it is four fingers and an opposing thumb. And you have joints where you can move the fingers. You have legs that have joints where they can move. You can walk. You can run. You can jump. You can. The human eye, is made with such amazing vision where you could see what resolution far greater than you could see with a computer. The resolution of the human eye. And then you have two eyes, which gives you stereoscopic vision. Likewise, you have hearing, which is amazing, the ability to hear all kinds of sounds. And you have stereoscopic hearing because you have two ears, stereoscopic vision because you have two eyes. Now, it's not a perfect world. Some skeptics will say, well, what about the people who are blind? You know, it's not a perfect world. That we have disease. We have all kinds of imperfections, but there will be a perfect world. God promises. And anyway, so when you look at all the beauty of the human body, the fantastic miracle of this creation, you know that somebody loves you. It's not just a thoughtless, mindless being of the universe, but it's some power that loves you infinitely, so much that he's with you every minute, beating your heart. After all, what is it that beats the heart? We don't know where that impulse comes from, that spark that fires the spark plug known as the human heart. Every second, even while you're sleeping, that heart beats 30,000 times while you're unconscious. Somebody cares about you. Somebody's keeping you alive.
That's right.
So anyway, God is in a different dimension, but there are also angels, fallen angels that we have read about from prophets that have heard from God, have been told to write down amazing prophecies that have actually come true, like the book of Revelation is coming true, and other things that in the Bible. Well, these prophets have been contacted by God and been told to record God's will and God's ways and God's hopes for us in our lives. And getting back, relating that to what's happening here, God has a way of swinging that pendulum every so often whenever the world becomes so immersed in evil that it is destroying itself, just as we have right now. We have the recurring evil that ancient history tells us occurred thousands of years ago when this object came in, this wrecking ball came in thousands of years ago to destroy mankind, when mankind was creating genetic mutations, which we're doing today, chimera, where they're crossing animals with human beings. They're doing genetic mutations with food that is destroying all living organisms, killing it with cancer. They're introducing diseases that are destroying the earth, and we know that these are evil forces. How do we know? Because the power elite, these powerful men, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, uh, the Habsburgs, the Warburgs, all of these powerful families, the Italian nobility of ancient Venice from the 13th century. These are names who you've never even heard before that rule the world. The British Crown, the Dutch Crown. All of these people notably, documentably worship Satan.
What about
It's
the
amazing.
Vatican?
I'm sorry, what?
I say, what about the Vatican?
The
Connected as well?
Vatican, there you go. You know, I'm glad you mentioned that. There was a manuscript that never did get published because Malachi Martin, the famous Vatican advisor, was evidently murdered. But this manuscript that Malachi Martin wrote, he had written several books. One of them was Keys of This Blood, but another was The Windswept House, a manuscript which spoke of the detailed satanic sacrifices in the bowels of the Vatican, where they sacrificed to Satan,
I think,
probably sacrificed children. I haven't read the manuscript, but you can probably find it if you look up The Windswept House.
well, I've heard him speak when, back in the day on Art Bell's show. Father Malachi. Yeah, so,
Martin,
some
right?
interesting stuff.
Yeah, and so right, so the Vatican, the Jesuits, and man's evil always takes over institutions on this
Yeah.
earth, and it's no surprise that the institution of religion, the Protestant Church, the Christian churches, the Catholic Christian Church, and even the Muslim churches, man has a way of powerful men, greedy men, aggressive men have a way of reaching the top because of their determination and their tenacity to gain power. And that's what happens with governments too, and that's why we have so much evil
Well,
ruling.
and how does this trend ever stop? Because it seems like it repeats itself through the history of this planet. You see things like you said that happened in ancient history. Coming back to happen yet again. I mean, you've got people killing each other, burning them, and cutting off heads, and in the name of religions and belief systems, and there's just so much going on that it's amazing that we're still stable here in 2015, at least for now.
Right. That's why it's so important that we commune with God. We know that He's here. We can't see Him, but I try to make it a point each day, and this is probably the most important thing that I could say to anyone, is meditate. Take just a few seconds every hour, for example. Try to make it a point. I know it's hard. We're very, very busy with our lives, but take a couple minutes every hour and just relax. Take some deep breaths and go into a state, an altered state of meditation where you get close to hypnosis. Essentially, hypnosis is nothing more than a state where the mind is very relaxed and the rhythm of the brain becomes more like an alpha, slow, cyclic electrical pattern called the alpha brain waves. And in that state of relaxation, then you simply clear your mind of all thoughts, which is very difficult to do because the mind is always working like
Yeah.
Pac-Man. You can't stop it from eating thoughts. But try to clear the mind through relaxation. That's what they do in the Eastern cultures, meditation, and just contemplate the presence of God without trying to visualize them. Just get a feeling for the presence of the Spirit of God without thinking about what you're going to say. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to hear anything. But if you contemplate the presence of God, you will eventually receive thoughts and guiding thoughts from God, as I do. I'm not a special person. I'm not chosen as a prophet. It can happen. Anyone can get guiding thoughts from God if they contemplate His presence frequently. And that's what we need to do. This is what's going to keep us safe from the forces of evil, because, and I have to get back to Planet X. I know I don't want to digress too much from it.
Well, I was going to say, what is God saying about Saturn? But we'll get to that in a minute.
You're right. Well, anyway, so the forces of evil are all around us. In fact, if you don't do anything and if we don't just go through our lives in a normal way, every single human being is affected by demonic spirits. And I mean, people will reject that idea and be offended by that idea because they think they're good, just as I used to think I was good too, and I know I am. But demonic spirits controlled my actions, and I have done things in my life that were, I mean, not crimes were committed, but I've done things that were hurtful to other people. And now I look back and I realize it was the influence of these spirits. And now that the Spirit of God is giving me a conscience, I can look back and say, wow, how could I have done that? Well, there's proof right there that I'm listening to the Spirit of God and overcoming those demonic spirits which infest this world, which basically rule this world. Look at the power elite. They literally worship this Satan and the evil spirits, whereas you and I don't know they're around. We don't worship them. We would never knowingly worship anything evil, but they do. So there must be something to it. There's obviously, they believe it. And to the extent that they would sacrifice children, and they would go up into space and do crazy things with the planets in order to honor and usher in the satanic forces to God, to rule the world. That's what their plan is. That's what their stated plan is, to have Satan rule this world. In fact, the Bible tells us this. The Bible was prophets of God, and they tell us exactly that scenario that is about to occur, where satanic forces are going to take over. That's the new world order that we see it forcing itself upon everyone.
They already have.
The world.
I say they already have.
Yep. And it's going to get to the point where we're going to have to sacrifice them. With the mark of the beast is something that's was prophesied 2,000 years ago, before electronics even existed, when men walked around with sandals and their coins were crudely made, and that's how they bought and sold, with crudely made gold and silver coins. And yet God came to his apostle John around the year 95 AD, nearly 2,000 years ago, and told him that there would be a time toward the end of the world when every man would be forced to take a mark in his right hand, not the left hand, but not any hand, but specifically in the right hand or in the forehead. And without that mark, you would not be able to buy or sell. Well, such a crazy prediction could never be understood by people of those days. But John diligently and dutifully wrote it down in the book of Revelation, and sure enough, we see it coming true. So it must have been God who gave this vision to John. Just as John had said, the Lord Jesus came to him and gave him the future of what's going to happen with the world in the book of Revelation, which he was told to write down. So we see that mark coming pretty soon, which is going to be a worship to Satan. And anybody who takes that mark is going to be doomed. They will not have another life. I know, and I think, Michael, that there is another life, an eternal life with God that is waiting for us after this life is over.
I know there is certainly another side, and and I believe in a creation. Absolutely, there's something over there. I just, I unfortunately every time I've had a chance to speak with an entity from the other side, I've never asked the right questions. I guess.
Yeah, right. And you don't even have to speak with them, because what you do is as I was suggesting, every hour, just take 2 minutes, say every hour, and just relax, take a few deep breaths, and go into that altered, that alpha state where you're very relaxed and you're sort of, your eyes are looking into the distance. And you could be hypnotized at that point, but there's no one there to hypnotize you. You are now free to listen for the thoughts of God and to feel the presence of God. And it's such a wonderful experience. I have felt it many times. It gives me such peace to know that there is God who loves me. This God is love. I mean, after all, you would not have such a miraculous body if someone who hated you created you, right? It rhymes. But just think about it. There must have been a lot of love in addition to the great power and brilliance of that creator that went into making you what you are. Just look at the human kidneys, what they do, and the heart and the lungs, all the organs of the body. It's just amazing. It's an amazing gift, the human body. And then when you look outside the human body, you see even more amazing things.
Well, I think
I
the
mean,
only thing that we have that, say, common animals don't have is, I guess, intelligence, if you want to call it that.
yeah, we have more intelligence. They have intelligence too, but we have more intelligence. And we have they have love too. Animals have more love. Dogs have more love than many human beings.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing. The dog and the cat are such wonderful friends to mankind. But there's something about the human soul that God is following us. He's with us every minute. I know He's with me, and He has been with me. Saved my life in that auto accident. I know that. It was just I should have been dead. So anyway, getting back to where Planet X might be, it's time for God has determined that it's time for the Earth to undergo destruction, but those who turn to God out of fear will be saved. And He prophesies this in the Bible. Those who call upon the name of the Lord during this time of great destruction, pillars of fire, and great earthly destruction, those who call upon God, even if it's at the last minute out of fear, will be saved. So where could it be now? It's making its big U-turn. That's obvious because basic physics tells us that an object of coming in, being pulled in gravitationally by the sun, is not going to hit the sun, but it's going to loop around. It's going to overshoot the sun and make a looping U-turn around the sun. Well, it's Gilbert Erickson figures that it's probably around Saturn right now, based upon Dr. Harrington's calculations. So it's near the outer planets, and that's why we've seen a let up, an ease up in the number of earthquakes. Because remember, a few years ago we had more earthquakes. That was probably when Planet X was passing below that revolving circular table that we call the ecliptic plane, right below the sun and right below the inner planets, Earth, Mercury, Venus. And that's why we saw more earthquakes at that time. But now that it has overshot and gone toward the outer portion of the underside of that revolving table, now it should be we should be seeing signs of abnormalities on the outer planets, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, and Jupiter. Gilbert Erickson feels that it's still below the ecliptic slightly, but I don't know how long it's going to take to make that U-turn, because it could be very slow. It could be a number more years than we thought. I know I've been surprised when you ask me about when. Everybody wants to know when. That's the big question.
Yeah.
I've been surprised because it's taken so long. I had expected it to be in sooner, but I'm glad I was wrong, because we've had that many more years of grace in which to survive without suffering. But it's all a warning.
Yeah,
God is
that's
trying to be graceful with us and gracious and patient.
and what's interesting is what you mentioned about Jupiter and Saturn and the changes that were there. I remember when Jupiter lost its storm, that big storm spot that it has, that eye.
Right. That's
And,
right.
yeah, when the stripes changed. And I remember when Saturn lost its rings. Do you remember that?
Yeah, right, right. So there you go. I mean, you could look at that and get a general rough estimate of where this thing is right now. Remember back in 2009 when there were comet crashes into the southern hemisphere of Jupiter, and this was unheard of. Up till then, the only comet crash that they had ever recorded was Comet Shoemaker-Levy in 93 or 94 that crashed into the southern hemisphere of Jupiter, but that was the only one. And then all of a sudden in 2009, we had about two of them, two crashes that were recorded by amateur astronomers, and NASA never would have released the photos had it not been photographed by Anthony Wesley, the Australian amateur astronomer, and a couple other guys. Chris Go from the Philippines is another amateur astronomer. We've got to follow these amateur astronomers. That's so important, and I haven't been doing that. But I would advise you and your audience to get on the internet and just look up. I would get onto Google and type in the word Saturn, just one word, but do a time search where you would limit the hits that you're looking for to those that have occurred, say, during the last month. Articles with the word Saturn in them that have been issued somewhere in the last month. And the same thing with the word Jupiter or Uranus. This is how we'll find out what anomalies may have been reported in recent weeks.
And you know what? It's not a bad idea also when you type in something like that. Also, go to images rather than just web search, because sometimes when you go to images, you see something interesting in an image, you can click on it. It'll take you to the website that's putting that out. And if it's a NASA website, who knows? You might get lucky and find something.
Yeah, right. Although NASA is pretty careful to keep important stuff off of their websites because, again, they don't want anybody to know what's going on. And you know what? Let me finish up this article here. Now, so again, we don't know where it is, but you can expect, look at what's happening to the Earth. I mean, you see cold that has never occurred before in our recorded history. I mean, the Weather Channel is saying these records go back to the 1800s.
Yeah.
Never before have we seen such cold. I mean, coming down into Florida. Florida is now in freezing, below freezing, even down into Orlando. So these anomalies are very worrisome. I'm just glad that we haven't seen the earthquakes, but they're bound to happen, eventually. Right now it's weather. Now, let me get onto the weather real quick. The Weather Channel has done a series called Forecasting the End, which was done a couple of years ago. And I recorded the introductory episode titled Rogue Planets.
Yeah,
And
I
I put
seen
that
that.
on my Vimeo website, Vimeo account. You can see that Rogue Planets if you just go to my account on Vimeo, John DiNardo. And they show us a wonderful graphic of the solar system, and they say if a rogue planet ever came in, here's what would happen. And they show this planet coming in to the outer solar system, and its gravitational pull begins to pull on Jupiter or Saturn and pulls them out of their orbit somewhat. Now, what effect would that have on planet Earth? Well, they tell you in this program, Rogue Planets on Forecasting the End series. They tell you that these outer planets, being so large, actually exert a gravitational pull on Earth and keep Earth in its circular orbit around the sun. You need pretty much a circular orbit in order to have decent, normal weather, livable weather conditions. Because if the orbit is elliptical, what's going to happen is in one part of the year, now one orbit is 1 year. Um, in outer, the extended outermost portion of that elliptical orbit, Earth would be too far away from the sun, and we would have disastrously cold winters. And then when the Earth came back in that elliptical orbit, the other half of the year, and when it came back closer to the sun, we would have disastrously hot, scorching summers. Isn't that something like what we're beginning to experience in the last few years?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, you look at these storms, you look at the snow. I mean, look at what happened to Western New York. I think, when was it, back in December? And now what's hitting New England, Massachusetts, what's hit them recently. And, I mean, the snow is just, I've seen some pictures that are pretty amazing. Uh,
Oh yeah. I mean, it's just
and
and
here's the thing now, John. When you get a lot of snow like that, I mean, even if it was a lot of rain, you get all that moisture. It's got to absorb into the ground, right? So they say that they some scientists believe that with enough liquid going in, absorbing into the ground, that can also contribute to plates moving around, and certainly if an earthquake is close to happening, that'll set it off maybe.
oh yeah. I mean, there's so many repercussions that can come from these epic cold cold spells that we're having here. And I just visualize, I see that connection there. I see the Earth possibly its orbit being stretched out and being the cause of some of this cold weather.
Hey,
Uh,
here's one for
now
you,
we've
quick.
been having epic hot summers too, so go ahead.
Well, John, I was just going to give you a comparison. You mentioned in Florida where it's going to be below freezing, and in Fairbanks, Alaska, it's 40 degrees.
Oh, okay. There's another side. I'm glad you brought that up. I put this thing out. It took a long time to write my scientific theory. I don't believe anybody in the world. I've looked for it. I don't believe anybody in the world has has envisioned this theory that I have taken a long time to write up very carefully, very detailed way. It's an extensive report, and I've posted it on my to my email list, and I've got to start tweeting it out on Twitter, tweeting the link to it because it is so important. And here's what the theory is: inside the Earth's core, and it makes sense to me. It's more than a theory; it's something that's based upon observations of what's happening. Earth's core, we know, is at the very center. It's like a pit, a solid pit within a fruit, like within an avocado, for example. The center core of the Earth is solid metal because the pressures are so great deep down in the Earth that metal precipitates out, and that's why you have metal in the center of the Earth, primarily metals and not so much of Earth matter, dirt and all that, stone and rock, but mostly metal. However, at the center of the Earth is a solid metal nugget or pit, uh, and then surrounding that solid metal inner core is an outer core of liquid molten metal. So just imagine this. How would you visualize it? Visualize a potter's wheel, and on the potter's wheel is a bowl filled with water. And in the center of the bowl of water is a cork, let's say a cork. Now the potter's wheel begins to spin just like the Earth begins to spin. Now the potter's wheel represents only the molten core of the Earth, with the cork being the solid metal inner core, and the water swirling around representing the molten iron outer core. And this, we know, is how the Earth's magnetic field is generated by this swirling sea of molten, mostly iron, mostly metal. And I want to describe in my detailed report that this metal is actually electrons in motion because, I've studied electronics for many years in physics, which includes electronics and electricity and magnetism. And what I've learned probably more intimately than a lot of these scientists who have not noticed it. But this metal is free electrons. That's what we were taught in electronics school. Just like copper wire has free electrons, electrons in the outer valence bands of the copper atoms, I should say. And the outer valence bands of the copper atoms are electrons that are relatively free. They're not closely bound to the nucleus of the copper atom. Consequently, they can be moved. They're like travelers, like wayfarers away from home. They don't stay inside, but they're like kids playing outdoors. You know what I mean? More or less,
Yeah.
these outlying valence electrons. So they're called free electrons, and they can be moved easily. Just as children playing outdoors can start getting into a little stampede, playing around with their friends, and then running in a long race outdoors along the street rather than staying inside the house dormant. That's what these free electrons are like. And when you take that copper metal with the free electrons, or iron in this case, primarily iron, which comprises the Earth's molten outer core, and you swirl it around. How does it swirl? Because Earth rotates each day, each 24 hours it makes one rotation. And now consequently, the molten outer core swirls. You have swirling metal with all the free electrons within it, and that motion of free electrons constitutes electric current. Anytime you have electrons in motion, you have electric current. So this electric current now is swirling like a belt, like a revolving belt around the belly of Earth, within Earth's core. And from this revolving, swirling belt of electrons, what is generated is an electromagnetic field that radiates outward. Visualize a hula hoop, okay? Earth is a huge body, like the person swirling the hula hoop would be the entire planet Earth. The hula hoop might be the inner core, even though the analogy is not perfect. The hula hoop is like that molten outer core within the Earth swirling around. And around the hula hoop, if you were able to cut open the hula hoop, right, and put rings around it, big rings around inside the hula, thread rings inside the hula hoop. I don't know if you're going to visualize that. Now the hula hoop is swirling, but there are rings swirling with hula hoop acting as the center of these rings. Those rings they represent the Earth's magnetic field. And that's why the Earth's magnetic field comes up like the skin of an apple, for example. The skin of an apple might describe the path of the ring of the Earth's magnetic field. It comes down through the center core, the southern core of the apple, and up around the skin of the apple, and then over into the top dimple of the apple stem, and back through the center core again. And that's how the Earth's magnetic field is shaped. It's caused by the rotation, by the swirling action of Earth's molten outer core. Now, what happens as long as the Earth is swirling nice and neatly, and that inner core is at the very center, you're going to have a nice swirling motion, smooth swirling motion. But what happens if that center the metal solid iron pit at the center, it gets pushed off center? Mm-hmm. Then what's going to happen instead of that metal core, inner core rotating at the very center, it is going to rotate and revolve at the same time, like a stir in a cup of coffee. If you were to put the stir right at the center of the cup of coffee and put it between the palms of your hand and keep it at the center, it would not stir very well. It would not cause a wavy motion. But once you take that stir and move it around the outer portions of the coffee cup, then you cause a disturbance, a wavy motion. And that's what happens now when this inner solid core gets pushed off center. It begins to cause a waviness. And I found that if you look at the model that I represented to you with the hula hoop and the rings around the hula hoop, you could see if that hula hoop becomes wavy, which is what's going to happen when the center solid inner metal pit core begins to move off center, it's going to cause a waviness in the hula hoop such that no longer will the Earth's magnetic field be nice and symmetrical like the skin of an apple, but it'll start to get wavy. And that's why we have a jet stream. The jet stream is produced by the Earth's magnetic field. So bottom line is I want to give you a 2-year cut through some of the scientific information and show you and tell you that whatever wavy pattern occurs with the Earth's molten outer core is going to be exactly represented by the Earth's jet stream. The jet stream of air that swirls around the Earth is going to become wavy in the same congruent pattern as the outer swirling core of the Earth's molten iron outer core. As a result, that's why we're getting these polar vortexes, because the jet stream is pulling these down, these air masses down from the North Pole. Years ago, when we had a smoothly swirling molten outer core, we had a jet stream that consequently, comparatively, swirled evenly, corresponding to the even swirling motion of the molten outer core. And that's why we had moderate weather during the 60s and 70s and 80s. Now that the jet stream at the Earth's outer core is swirling and becoming wavy due to the disturbing turbulent effect of that off-center molten solid metal core, that off-center solid core. Now it's becoming the molten metal outer core is becoming wavy, like a surfer's wave.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we're getting these disturbances. You look at the jet stream. Jet stream, again, I say, corresponds congruently to the swirling wavy action, the abnormally wavy action of the Earth's molten outer core. And it swirls, that jet stream on the Weather Channel every day shows you that it's coming way up like a roller coaster, up into Canada, up into Alaska, in fact. That's how big it has become. And then dipping all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico and Florida. That's how huge that turbulence is.
Okay, John, hold on for a moment. We've got to take one last break, and then you and I will come back, and we've got probably another good 35, 40 minutes to go when we get back, and we'll talk more about that, about the core, about the Earth, and where we're headed. So hang on with us, folks. The Earth actually just goes through, because people will often say that, well, there's been proof that in the past that the Earth has had floods, there's been pole shifts and magnetic pole shifts, and is it natural?
These are natural but disastrous cycles. And when people say, "Oh, it's just a cycle you're going through," it's just like telling somebody it's the nonsensical statement that, well, don't worry about dying. Everybody's going to die. But wait a minute. What if something's coming to kill you right now? Don't you want to know about it so you can avoid it? So this is a serious thing. It's going to be devastating to the human race. Yes, it is cyclical, and the reason it's cyclical is because this object comes in every 36 and a half centuries. I wanted to zoom out from my detailed study of explanation of the Earth's core and show you the big picture as to what is causing the Earth's center core to be moved, and that is excitations from the sun. The sun has been so powerful and putting out so many emissions over the last 15 years. Sometimes the sun has quieted down, yes, but if you average out the sun's activity, you'll see that it's solar blasting, it's solar winds and flares have excited Earth's magnetic field and fed back that electromagnetic energy into the center core of the Earth, and that, I believe, is what has shifted the Earth's core, solid metal inner core, off of its center and caused the irregular wavy flow of the Earth's molten metal outer core.
So basically, John, is it like say a tennis ball, and you get, well, you mentioned a ball bearing earlier, so you get a metal, even a metal, big metal ball bearing, put it inside the a tennis ball, and then again, if you were to run a magnet close nearby, it would pull that whole tennis ball,
Very
right?
good. Yeah, it's a good analogy. That's what's happening to the Earth's solid metal inner core, and we have consequently have been seeing these roller coaster like undulations of the jet stream, which are the cause of this disastrous weather. So it's important that we analyze it and see, wow, what's going on here? I mean, people are suffering in New England. People are suffering in all over the country from this cold weather. And when it gets worse, more and more people are going to die. So we have to know about this, and we have to know, is it, as you said, some skeptics will, hopefully, in their hope, uh, will say, well, maybe it's just a cycle and maybe it'll get better, maybe it'll go away. That is a deadly suicidal notion. I'll tell you right now. Things are only going to get worse. I am absolutely positive. I'm not trying to be a scaremonger. I'm trying to help people and let them know that all of my studies and the studies of other people like me indicate that this is going to get worse because this object is definitely coming in, and I can show you proof. Here's the Power Elite have built underground cities. I have recorded it. They've taken it off of YouTube because that's how revealing it is and worrisome it is to the public. They have taken Jesse Ventura's Apocalypse 2012 uh, TV program off of, I can't find it on YouTube anymore. They said, well, it's a copyright infringement. Well, maybe I shouldn't be telling you because they might take mine down too. I put it up on Vimeo, and I hope they don't take it down. But you can go to my Vimeo channel and you can see the Apocalypse 2012.
Well,
Jesse Ventura went into the bowels of Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, and they videotaped all that's going on there. This is $1 trillion facility, and they're going underground when things get bad.
yeah, I seen that, and I actually talked to Jesse Ventura about that. And his whole thing was, yeah, they're preparing for something, but he wouldn't say whether he thought it was, anything, celestial. But nevertheless, he felt
Why
that.
wouldn't he say? Did he comment? Did he say I don't know
No, he
or
actually told me in the interview I did with him. He says that he didn't, he's seen a lot of circumstantial evidence, but he didn't see any proof that it was Planet X that they were preparing for. But that it could even been a nuclear war they were preparing for. He said, but
well,
that's
I think
him.
well, yeah, nuclear war is another reason why they would want to go underground for sure. But Jesse Ventura did that report, and you see him in that report where he says they're going underground because of what's happening. I mean, he detailed that the sun is going to go through some terrible traumatic blasting, which is going to be hazardous to life on the surface of Earth. And they are going underground. I mean, it's all detailed in those episodes that I put on Vimeo. So for Jesse Ventura to say he doesn't see any evidence that it's an incoming body, well, I can understand that too. But realize that he's under threat. I mean, he's a courageous man, but if he says anything that he shouldn't be saying, he may not be alive. In fact, that's why he moved to Mexico.
Yeah, yeah.
He's got a lot of courage, and there are certain things that he cannot say, certain things that Alex Jones cannot say, because their lives are threatened. And if I ever got, or you or I ever got to be a position where we're highly visible publicly, we may be threatened too.
Okay,
That's
I'll
what
tell
we.
you what, I'm not as big as those guys, but I've already had threats. I mean, I get attacked. I've had my websites ripped down, all kinds of stuff. So I know I can imagine it gets better the more popular you get.
Yeah, I mean, they don't want us to be telling these things, and I'm surprised. I mean, I can only depend on God to protect me because God wants me. I know from the thoughts that I get from communing with God and knowing His character and reading the Bible. He says, warn people about what is coming. That's what He did in God's Word. The book of Revelation is a warning to the world that what something disastrous. Comets are going, meteors are going to strike Earth. I mean, it's all in the book of Revelation. There are going to be earthquakes that are so huge. Every island and every mountain will be shaken. and moved. That's how bad it's going to get. So God is warning us to look. What we have to do is prepare now. We cannot be skeptical and put our heads in the sand, because if an ostrich bends over and sticks his head in the sand, he's making his butt a very large target. And we don't want to be ostriches to do that, because it's suicidal. So people have to wake up. And those who are aware, like you and I, and those who are proactive and courageous are going to prepare, and those who don't want to listen will fall by the wayside.
Yeah. Well, and then I think about this too, and it's not a cop out or anything, but then if something like this happens, if this does come to be, what about all these nuclear power plants that we have around the planet? I mean, how can anybody prepare for what that will do?
You can't. You can only depend upon God. I mean, we have our basements. There is going to be, if with nuclear war and nuclear meltdowns of power plants, we have to stay indoors and try to minimize the radiation that we're exposed to. You're right. There's so many power plants that would be recklessly built on fault lines in the New Madrid fault zone area of the lower Midwestern United States. There are many nuclear power plants built right on fault lines, and there's one in New York, just north of New York City here, not far from where I live. It's the Indian Point nuclear power plant is built right on top of a fault line. And when that earthquake occurs, which they will, all the fault lines will be disrupted and cracked open from the earth changes that are the pressures that are occurring within Earth right now. Those nuclear power plants will melt down, and we're going to have radiation. I mean, just look at Fukushima, one nuclear plant, what it has done to planet Earth, and then multiply that by 100 nuclear power plants, which they will not shut down. The people won't go for it because they're too dependent upon the power. And what are they doing? They're shutting down the coal-fired power plants on this suspicious notion that the coal is polluting the atmosphere, and they're turning it over to all the nuclear interests, the nuclear power wealth interests.
Well, I'll tell you,
And
we've got several vents on the ocean floor, volcanoes that constantly are releasing the CO2, and so and it releases more than you or I could ever make with our SUVs or any of that. So
that's right.
it's a real poor argument they put out for global warming. Yet people will still argue with me about it and say, "Oh, how could you say it's not real? Don't you see what's happening?" It's like, yeah, but there's another answer to it, because there's not people on Mars, and it wasn't long ago they had a 40-degree day there. So, um,
Yeah, right. I mean, Mars is undergoing the same kind of abnormal changes too, and the other planets, as you point out. So, it's not something that we're doing on Earth that's causing this. It's something coming from the outside. But of course, the powers that be had to make up an excuse and blame it on what man does.
well, yeah,
And
because
that's
then
a good point.
they could tax us too. Now, oh, we're going to get all these carbon taxes,
Oh
and we
yeah,
could
right,
build more
right.
facilities.
They use it to make money, to get wealthy. That's right, the carbon taxes. At the same time, what they do is, and I've always likened this to Batman and Robin. Sure, man is contributing slightly, just like Robin would contribute slightly to some of the action in a fight involving Batman and Robin against the bad guys. But the man harp and all that stuff that man is doing, the harp experiments that are disturbing the earth, that's like Robin's power compared to Batman, which is Planet X. And that's what they don't want you to know. You see, the power elite, as long as they can fool us into believing that they are the ultimate power, the supreme power on earth, then we will fear them and obey them and be their obedient slaves. However, when people begin to realize that it's not Satan controls mankind on earth, and Satan wants to be the one who keeps man in fear. Just look at the fear they're imposing on us through Satan's New World Order. However, they don't want us to know that God is far more powerful. In the book of Revelation, tells us that there's going to be a battle between uh, for man's soul, man's devotion, man's attention. That battle will be between Satan and his New World Order and the superior, fearful, awesome force of God, bringing in Planet X, disrupting the Earth with earthquakes. I'm much more afraid of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions than I am of the government. And everybody is.
Yeah.
So that's what they don't want you to know, because as soon as we become more fearful of God and his power coming from the heavens and coming on us to disrupt this earth, then they will become obedient and call out to God rather than obedient to Satan. And that's what Satan hates. And that's why they're making you believe, tricking so many people, even well-meaning patriots who really don't study God's word, don't study the Bible and the prophecies of the end destruction of this earth.
Well,
They don't know that this is all a big scam to make it look like it's HARP and fracking. That's another big scam. Fracking is supposedly the cause of all these earthquakes. Well, you watch and see when these earthquakes occur and the entire world begins to crack open like a raw egg, and see how many people are going to be talking about fracking.
yeah, well, we know that fracking's not good, but I do know this, that there's areas where they don't frack and they're undergoing lots of earthquakes too. Whether they're small ones or not, they're still having them. So I wouldn't contribute at all to fracking by no means, but I've said that in the past that, what if they use things like harp and these different things? What if they, yeah, they do have a purpose for them, but what if they purposely blow them out of proportion to take you off of what's really going on? But then I've said that the other way around too. There was a time when I said, well, what if Planet X is to take us away from what they're doing here on Earth? But I don't think that man can do half as much as what nature can do. Although either one could wipe us out.
Well, no, you're right. I mean, it's the man is doing some damage, and see, again, it's a battle between Satan and God, and this is a supernatural uh, situation that Earth is experiencing here, and people have to understand that. A lot of patriots try to fight the New World Order and get our Constitution back. There's no way you can stop the New World Order because with man's help only. You need supernatural power of God, because Satan, with his power, there are billions, literally billions, of fallen angels who are aiding Satan, indwelling people. I know it sounds weird, but there are these spirits are throughout scriptures. We can see prophecies of Jesus, the Son of God, and even people who don't believe that he's the Son of God will certainly believe that he was honest in his in the four Gospels, where he talked about demons, fallen angels indwelling people in many instances throughout the four Gospels. So we know that this is true. We know that Jesus gave us true prophecy. And we know that if demons had possessed people then and made them do bad things, I experienced demons affecting my life throughout my life. I told you about some of the things I did. I know it was from demonic spirits who knew that I was destined to be a child of God and were trying to pull me away and destroy me. And we see many people, and very often there's the same pattern of experience that children of God have. They have a very turbulent life in their early years because they're being misled and directed by demonic spirits who want to pull them away from God, but ultimately God wins the battle and brings them closer to him. That's what happened to me, and that's what happened to many people in the past. So we know that these demonic spirits are influencing us, and this is a spiritual battle. Therefore, this is a spiritual battle. There's no way you can stop the New World Order unless you turn to God, and he's going to protect us. The book of Revelation, for example, tells us that what's going to happen is these angels are now coming through portals, all right, dimensional portals, indwelling men, and you see evil multiplying and intensifying in mankind today in so many cases. And what's happening, though, is that other people are turning to God, and the goodness of human beings is also intensifying. And that's why the line is being drawn. There's a polarization occurring, uh, so that all the people who are sitting on the fence in between, not choosing good or evil, just spectators and on the world stage, in the audience of the world around the world stage, are now being forced to make a decision to choose either God or choose the devil. And that's what they're doing with television. So this whole thing is all part of the same multifaceted situation, where you have Planet X coming in, great destruction facing the Earth, and now it's intensifying the destruction with the weather. And then you see great evil enveloping mankind and the governments of the world, such that it's becoming a unification of evil, a one world government, conglomeration. All the nations are being amalgamated into this one evil force under the powers of Satan, the New World Order. At the same time, destruction comes and man is being forced to make a choice. Soon we'll be forced to worship Satan. Take that mark in your hand, which will be, the Bible tells us, the book of Revelation is going, that mark with which you cannot buy or sell. You see, you need that mark, you need to buy stuff. So as a result, you're going to take that mark, and that's how Satan is going to get people to worship him, through that mark of allegiance in their body. And they're being prepared now with these marks, the tattoos all over their bodies, pins in their bodies, rings all over their body. It's disgusting. And you can see the preparation for the people taking the mark right now, the psychological acceptance of it.
Yeah, and there's actually people. I seen a video recently where a woman was really happy because she was the first one to get the chip, and she got a chip. I think it was put in her hand. Now, which one I'm not sure of, but she did get it put in her hand, and I forget what it was for. It was for some, but eventually that's what it's coming to. I seen today.
Soldiers, all the military
Yeah,
are being chipped.
I seen today where they says some kind of computer technology now where wouldn't it be nice, you don't have to put your password in anymore. Your face becomes your password. So the computer will do facial recognition to let you. I mean, if people got that lazy now where they can't even type in their passwords, they got to get facial recognition to get into their computers. And so, yeah, you're right. People will run for this chip. And I think that the chip is what was considered the mark of the beast. I think if there's going to be truth to that, I think that we're seeing it now. We're seeing it with the chips. And I think that when it comes to the Antichrist, I think that that's a series. I actually think it's the UN, to be honest with you, that's
Well,
your Antichrist.
it'll be a man, definitely one man who will rule, who will be so powerful and have so much charisma that the entire world will look to him as their leader of peace after the great war of destruction, which they're planning now, a nuclear war. That's where they're planning to go underground in Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, Mount Weather in West Virginia, and the other nations. Italy has their own underground cities for the Vatican and the Italian Alps. It's all over the world. Russia, all the nations know about this. The governments of all the nations know about this incoming Planet X, the disaster that's coming. And they have already prepared with their multi-billion, trillion-dollar underground cities, just like are shown on Jesse Ventura's video. This tremendous, vast, a vast city underneath the Denver airport and in nearby Cheyenne Mountain. Uh, well, anyway, but let me get on real quick and try to get back to where I was
Okay.
with Planet X. Now, finishing this article with 1983, they said, we're going up to look for Planet X. The infrared astronomical satellite was developed by three nations to go and find this object. Sure enough, they found it, and I'll read the last part of the article. Recent calculations by the United States Naval Observatory. This is January 1983, New York Times. Recent calculations by the United States Naval Observatory have confirmed the orbital perturbation exhibited by Uranus and Neptune, which Dr. Thomas C. Van Flandern, an astronomer at the observatory, says could be explained by a single undiscovered planet. He and a colleague, Dr. Robert Harrington, incidentally, who was murdered because, this is my comment, and McCanney and others know this, and they agree that Dr. Robert Harrington was probably murdered because he was about to publicize his discovery of Planet X and the fact that his sightings, his astronomical sightings, showed that this object was moving toward Earth. Of course it would be moving toward Earth because it's being gravitationally pulled in by the great gravitational force field of our sun. But Dr. Harrington calculated this planet to be very large, and I'll skip on through the article. Now, they estimated at that time, in 1983, way back then, almost a third of a century ago, that it was about 5 billion miles beyond Pluto. And it says here in the article, hardly next door, but still within the gravitational influence of the sun. Now, I'm the only one who has noted that this is a very telling comment. It was 5 billion miles out, but they stated in the scientific article that it was still within the gravitational influence of the sun. That means it's like a ball bearing that has just barely got within the outer fringes of the gravitation of the magnetic force field of a powerful magnet, say some distance away. And once it gets even within the weak outer fringes of that force field, it will get inexorably sucked in, and it will begin to accelerate. Well, that's exactly what's happening here since it's been captured. So they noted in this article that this dwarf star was indeed captured in the outer bounds of our solar system by our sun's gravitational force field. And that's basically the article there. But I want to tell you something about the Pope now. In Pope John Paul II, I've got an article in front of me, and this you can document this. You can find the proof of this in Fulda, F-U-L-D, Germany, in 1980. Pope John Paul II. I'm reading in this article. The October 1981 issue of the German magazine, and I'm going to try to pronounce it, Stimme des Glaubens, S-T-I-M-M-E, for those who want to research it. D-E-S is the next word. G-L-A-U-B-E-N-S, Stimme des Glaubens, reported in this German magazine the discussion between Pope John Paul II that he had with a group of German Catholics in November of 1980. The following is a verbatim report of this discussion between Pope John Paul II and leading Catholics in Germany. The Holy Father was asked, what about the third secret of Fatima? Should it not have been published by 1960? Now, for those who don't know, there was a great messianic fervor in the late 1950s because people were waiting for the revelation that was promised by the sisters who had seen this vision in 1917 at Fatima, Portugal. And the third secret had been kept secret, kept in a letter from one of the girls. The only survivor was Sister Lucia, who became a nun. And her letter was from the angel that spoke to her was supposed to be revealed in 1960. Well, it never was revealed. Pope Pius XII died in the late 1950s before that 1960 revelation time occurred. And I have information that he was murdered. Pope Pius XII was probably murdered along with Cardinal Ottaviani, O-T-T-A-V-I-A-N-I. The reason is that they were both privy to the letter. They had opened the letter in the late 1950s in the presence of Father Richard Hughes, the secretary, the American priest secretary of Pope Pius XII. And they read the letter, and I was told by a source that I cannot reveal that Pope, when he read this letter of destruction, Pope Pius XII wept bitterly for that was the words. Pope Pius XII wept bitterly for 2 weeks following the reading of that letter, the private reading between him and Cardinal Ottaviani and Father Hughes. Father Hughes revealed this. I hope he's okay and not in danger. But anyway, so it was a horrible revelation, and it was never revealed. Pope Pius XII died, and in 1960 they did not keep their promise. They did not open the letter, and that's why the question was asked in 1980 to Pope John Paul II: why did not they reveal the published this 1960 Fatima secret, the third secret? And Pope John Paul II replied, quote, "Given the seriousness of the contents, my predecessors in the Petrine office diplomatically preferred to postpone publication so as not to encourage the world power of communism to make certain moves." Well, that was a cover story where they blamed communism and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But here he goes on and spills the beans, tells the real truth. Quote, Pope John Paul II said, "On the other hand, it should be sufficient for all Christians to know this: if there is a message in which it is written that the oceans will flood whole areas of the earth, and that from one moment to the next, millions of people will perish, truly the publication of such a message is no longer something to be so much desired." End quote.
Hmm.
And there was the essence of the third secret of Fatima.
See, I wish somebody would just go in and snatch it and put it out to the public.
He told us right there what it is. And you know what? Sister Lucia was murdered. There is so much evidence. Sister Lucia, one of the girls who had heard from the angel. This was an angel of God, a supernatural event where God gave this angel to the little, had this messenger angel tell the little girls what was going to happen, and they died. Some of them died from the Great Spanish Flu, but Sister Lucia remained, and you could see photos of bogus imposters of Sister Lucia. They're all on the internet, where you can compare the faces, and they're definitely not the same face. I mean, anyone, but especially those who are done forensic or studies of facial structure, have shown us what we can clearly, with any layman can see with their eyes, that this is not the same woman. Sister Lucia was murdered probably around 1948. They moved her from one convent to another. Then there was a phony one, and I was told that there was a second phony, well, the first phony Sister Lucia refused to go along with it, and they probably killed her. And now they got this other Sister Lucia who played the role until she died a few years ago. She was visited by the actor.
I'm not sure, but is
the
she
actor who played Jesus in the Passion of the Christ?
now? Is she the one they have encased in a glass like setting, and I mean people were viewing her or whatever? She's in
I don't know. She was in. Oh, I mean, you mean when she was?
Well, after her death, they had the body inside a glass casing.
I did not follow the story after her death. That may have probably, but it was an imposter, really. It was someone playing the role of Sister Lucia, because she probably wanted to talk, especially at a time when they figured, look, this woman's too dangerous. We have to get rid of her. It's all because the power elite do not want to disturb the world. If they were to, just as the Pope said here, I mean, he said it as clearly as you could possibly. And he made it so obvious. He said, if there's such a message that the oceans will flood whole areas of the earth, and that from one moment to the next, millions of people will perish, truly the publication of such a message is no longer something to be so much desired. In other words, we ain't going to tell you if the world is going to end. We'd be crazy to tell you that.
Well, right, and he says if there was such a message, so it's like he told us, but he didn't tell us. And
no, he's saying, hey, if there's a message. In other words, there is a message. That's basically what he's implying. He's just about coming out and saying it. I mean, 99% revealing it to you. That's the message. That whole oceans will flood whole areas of the earth, and from one moment to the next, millions of people will perish. That's the vision that was given to the Sister Lucia, in 1917 in Fatima, Portugal, that oceans would flood the earth and people would be dying. And of course, we know the book of Revelation tells us that after the floods, there's going to be burning. The earth will be destroyed by fire. That's what the book of Peter tells us too. Um, so how would it be destroyed by fire? Well, as this planet gets closer and closer, it's inevitable. There's no way you can stop it. Just like you cannot stop a meteor being sucked into Earth's gravitational field and plunging to the Earth. You can't stop it. This brown dwarf star cannot be stopped in its plunge toward the sun, in its gravitational plunge toward the sun. And as it passes by Earth and through the inner solar system, its gravitational and its electromagnetic influences will be so great that it's going to tilt Earth, tilt it so that you tip it like you would tip over a teacup, and Earth is going to rotate vertically. In fact, if you look at the book of Isaiah, 600 BC, where it was written around 6 centuries before the birth of Christ, in that book of Isaiah, chapter 24, it says the earth will wobble to and fro like a drunkard, which is what it's beginning to do right now. Look at that inner core. It's off center. That solid metal inner core is being forced off center by the overall average long-term solar blasting that's been occurring, magnetically influencing the Earth's, feeding back through the Earth's magnetic field, causing the Earth to wobble. But as this planet gets closer to this dwarf star, its gravitational field is also going to cause an additional wobbling of the Earth. So the book of Isaiah, this is God spoke to Isaiah, and Isaiah said, the word of the Lord came to me. This was 600 years before Christ. In chapter 24, it says, the earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard. Just imagine a drunk walking down the street and staggering like he's going to fall over. And after it reels to and fro, it will topple. Well, what happens to a spinning top, a child's top? Have you ever seen one?
Yeah,
Most of us have, but
they slowed.
nowadays, I don't know, they don't have too many for kids, but the spinning top is like a gyroscope, and it maintains its erectness because of its spin. But as the spin begins to slow down, it loses its erectness, and it begins to wobble. And eventually, the wobbling begins to increase, intensify, exaggerate, until the top topples. That's what's going to happen to planet Earth. Why? Well, it's like a hand. The Earth is being, it's losing its revolutionary momentum due to another object acting upon it externally, disrupting it. Its rotation, its revolution around the sun. And that object is a brown dwarf star, which NASA itself calls Planet X. And that object acts like a giant hand at a distance, because gravity is action at a distance. A giant hand slowing down the top, pulling on it, causing it to wobble, slow down in its rotation, daily rotation, and to wobble and fall over. And it also says, it will nod like a hammock. But I don't want to go into too much detail because we have limited time. But they did discover it. Okay, I read you the New York Times, January 1983, 11 short months later, after the infrared astronomical satellite spent most of 1983 searching out Planet X. It found Planet X, and they reported it triumphantly on the front page of the Washington Post. The Washington Post front page, Washington Post, December 30th, 1983. The New York Times article was January 30th, 1983. So you have here a full 11 months later. Here's the article, front page. I've got it right in front of me. I photocopied it from the library, Washington Post. Possibly as large as Jupiter, a mystery heavenly body written by Thomas O'Toole, Washington Post staff writer. This is the actual photocopy of the newspaper article. Quote, a heavenly body, possibly as large as the giant planet Jupiter and possibly so close to Earth that it would be part of this solar system, has been found in the direction of the constellation Orion by an orbiting telescope aboard the U.S. infrared astronomical satellite. And so here they discovered it. And they go on to sort of like, well, they figure, well, we better not give them the whole story. We better make it a little bit. We don't want to tell them exactly because it could be a little bit scary. So what they're doing is they're saying so mysterious is the object that astronomers do not know if it's a planet, a giant comet, a nearby protostar that would be Planet X that never got hot enough to become a star, or a distant galaxy so young that it's in the process of forming. Well, and these are all like subterfuge that was thrown in around the major story that it was Planet X. Now, they revealed to you that it was Planet X 11 months earlier in the New York Times that they were looking for, and now they're sort of covering it up a little bit because evidently the national security, our lovely surveillance system, national security agency, who governs all of these other government agencies, told them, don't be making this thing too conspicuous. Just don't be making the story too obvious because we don't want to panic the people. It could upset the stock market, upset the economy, affect a whole lot of people's wealth. And it's true. I mean, you don't want to scare the people. Well, anyway, they shrouded it a little bit, but it was an excited revelation because these men were proud of what they had found, these men in NASA. So there you go. They discovered it, but they covered it up a little bit. Discovered it, but covered it.
Right.
And after that, they said, okay, the NSA must have told them. It's clear to me. Don't talk about it at all. Don't even cover it up. Don't even mention it. This subject is off limits. It's a blackout. Don't talk about it anymore. And now it's been secret ever since then.
I see. Well, John, we're just about out of time. I want to give you the next 3 minutes to get out anything that you'd like, plug any websites or anything. Go ahead, and I want to thank you for taking time out to be with us. I've never doubted that the possibility of something being out there, and I know they've looked for it, and I know they've said they found it. So I'm sure that what you're telling us is pretty accurate. Now, it's just for me, I'm one of those guys who I have to see it before I'll run to the hills anyways. I don't have to see it to know that something's there. That I don't. But I guess for me, it's wherever the good Lord takes me, I'm supposed to be. If it's meant for me to run to the hills and survive this thing or get underground, then that's what'll happen. But I have no plans of running. I'm going to sit here and keep telling people what's going on until I'm stopped, until it all ends. But I thank you
Sure.
so much. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I advise everybody just keep watching the weather. It's very important that you keep your eyes on what's happening. Look at the reports of the earthquakes and the volcanic eruptions, reports that Yellowstone, which is a super volcano, is showing signs it's about to erupt, and try to get prepared in whatever way you can. For example, with Yellowstone, you have to get these masks. I ordered some of these. They're very relatively cheap. Welders masks. They have very high filtration, very good filtration. It's a welder's mask. It's straps on, has adjustable straps, and they're pretty cheap, only a few bucks for each one. I bought about 20 of them. So start ordering these welder's masks. I forget the name and everything, but you can look it up on the internet. Start getting the other supplies that you need. Food, of course, is so important. Canned food, canned white meat chicken, and then dried legumes, dried split peas, dried lentils, barley, canned beans, all the food that's preservable and that you can use to survive on. Most important thing is water. You cannot go without water for more than a day or so. I've got so many empty bottles that I've been collecting. I never throw away empty bottles, plastic bottles. I don't care that they're plastic because I'm going to filter the water anyway. And besides, When you're dying of thirst, you're not too fussy about the quality of the water. So I've got like hundreds of gallons of water stored in my basement um, from empty bottles. Now you can go to the recycling place and get a lot of them in a short period of time. Maybe they'll give you some. So that's the idea, to get those water bottles, because you want to survive. Water is the most essential, and air, of course, with the masks when the volcano erupts and when the other disasters occur. You're going to have skies that are filled with deadly fumes and smoke and ash, etc. So you're going to need good gas masks. And think of all the other things too that you're going to need for surviving the weather that you'll be monitoring yourself: the volcanic eruptions, the earthquakes, the storms, the snow, the droughts. As you go
Sure.
along, you'll see what you need just by the suffering that people are experiencing. They'll know what they need to get. For example, your roof covered with snow. How do you get the snow off of there without risking your life? It's another problem. So we learn how to make things that we need as we go along. That's my advice. Keep your mind on God every hour or so. Just meditate for a couple of minutes and feel the real but invisible presence of God, and God will guide you. That's my advice.
All right. Well, John, thank you so much. I always appreciate having you on. I love talking with you. You make a lot of sense and you bring a lot of facts, and I appreciate that. And till next time, stay safe and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Michael.
All right, John. Have a good night, my friend.
You too. Good night.
Good night. All right, everybody. John DiNardo.
Determined that Planet X was located. So that gave them proof that indeed this gravitational body was out there when the Pioneer 10 passed by Pluto. And I'll continue reading here. Uh, they're hoping that a satellite-borne telescope launched last week will detect heat signatures from the planet or whatever it is out there. This is the infrared astronomical satellite. It was boosted into a 560-mile high polar orbit Tuesday night. We're talking January 1983 now, this article. It was boosted into a 560-mile high polar orbit Tuesday night from Vandenberg Air Force Base, California. It represents an $80 million venture by the United States, Britain, and the Netherlands. So here we have three nations very much interested in this unseen massive object out there. So interested that they got together, the Netherlands, the US, and Britain, and developed this infrared astronomical satellite specifically to spot this object. In the next 6 or 7 months, the telescope is expected to conduct a wide-ranging survey of nearly all the sky, detecting sources not of ordinary light, but of infrared radiation, which is invisible to the human eye and largely absorbed by the atmosphere. Scientists thus hope that the new telescope will chart thousands of infrared emitting objects that have gone undetected: stars, interstellar clouds, asteroids, and with any luck, the object that pulls at Uranus and Neptune. So they're saying, yeah, they're secondary celestial bodies that they're interested in seeing with this infrared astronomical satellite, but the main object is Planet X, the large, what they believe is a dwarf star. I'll continue reading.
Okay.
The last time a serious search of the skies was made, it led to the discovery in 1930 of Pluto, the ninth planet. But the story begins more than a century before that, after the discovery of Uranus in 1781 by the English astronomer and musician William Herschel. Until then, the planetary system seemed to end with Saturn. As astronomers observed Uranus, noting irregularities in its orbital path, many speculated that they were witnessing the gravitational pull of an unknown planet. So began the first planetary search based on astronomers' predictions, which ended in the 1840s with the discovery of Neptune almost simultaneously by English, French, and German astronomers. So anyway, the article goes on. It's what we're seeing in this article. What we're learning is that for nearly 200 years, astronomers have observed gravitational perturbations or disruptions regarding a celestial body, which NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, long has termed Planet X. They've given it the name Planet X since famous astronomer Percival Lowell gave it this name back in 1910 when they were searching for a planet, a distant planet whose gravitational pull was being observed on the outer planets. And I'm going to read you this article from the New York Times, January 1983, nearly a third of a century ago, when they actually sighted it. They were actively looking for it. They actually developed a space telescope designed specifically to sight and detect this object. That's how important and how great the concern was within the scientific community of the United States government about this object, Planet X, that they went through the trouble of developing the infrared astronomical satellite. And here's the article. I'm reading right from a photocopy that I got of this article from my library, January 1983, titled Clues Get Warm in the Search for Planet X by John Noble Wilford, New York Times. Quote, something out there beyond the farthest reaches of the known solar system seems to be tugging at Uranus and Neptune. Some gravitational force keeps perturbing the two giant planets, causing irregularities in their orbits. The force suggests a presence far away and unseen, a large object that may be the long-sought Planet X. Evidence assembled in recent years has led several groups of astronomers to renew the search for this 10th planet. They are devoting more time to visual observations with the 200-inch telescope at Mount Palomar in California. They are tracking two Pioneer spacecraft now approaching the orbit of distant Pluto to see if variations in their trajectories provide clues to the source of the mysterious force. And my comment is what they're talking about is Pioneer 10 and 11 were sent up specifically to see if there would be a gravitational pull upon these two one of the space probes, Pioneer 10. They sent it up to near distant Pluto, just as the article mentions, so that it would get near enough to their calculation of where Planet X was, that Planet X would actually exert a significant or detectable gravitational pull on this Pioneer 10 space probe and would thus pull it off of its trajectory somewhat, and that would
John
Hello.
DiNardo, welcome to Late Night in the Midlands. How are you, my friend?
Hi, Michael. I'm fine. Very
Uh,
good.
it's great to have you back, and we are live right now. And I'm about a minute early, so I guess I didn't catch you too early. But I thank you for jumping on with us at such short notice.
Oh,
Uh,
you're welcome, Michael. I'm happy to be with you whenever you need me.
Well, thank you, because tonight our original guest, it was supposed to be about coming catastrophes and different Earth changes. So I thought, well, what better person to replace that with when somebody who knows a whole lot about this stuff. So uh, I'm glad to have you here tonight, and I guess first off, we could start out with the weather. What is going on?
So, seen it over and over repeatedly, all sorts of bizarre and extreme weather. Uh, for example, softball-sized hail, baseball-sized hail storms, windstorms that are extremely high velocity, winds that frequently approach and exceed hurricane force, which is 74 miles an hour or greater. And we see that straight line windstorms at these high wind speeds, hurricane wind speeds, and in the form of what the weatherman called derecho. A derecho is a wide area windstorm, numerous states before, such as a haboob. A haboob is a dust storm where the clouds of dust rise up to maybe 1,000 feet or so, and just blanket an entire city, so that their visibility is very poor and virtually zero. And those are just examples of bizarre weather events that we've been seeing that have never occurred before or have rarely occurred in recorded history. We're seeing, as you see, record epic cold spells, breaking records constantly. I mean, in the South, the records are being smashed, and throughout the country, at least east of the Mississippi, records are being smashed for cold weather. We know that Earth is in trouble. It's obvious to anyone, even a person who is not studying weather or is not studying, give them proof that indeed this object is where they had calculated it to be. And sure enough, they did. Well, they don't report on findings that they consider to be secret, and to them, to the government, everything is secret. You know that.
Well, yeah,
They
and
take our money and they go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was just talking about a story in the beginning of the show where they said that this spacecraft that they had sent up there to get the best pictures they've ever got of Pluto, they say, things that even Hubble can't do. They say they're now finding moons around Pluto. So you got to wonder, is there just another solar system sitting back there?
Well, yes. I mean, in the area of the region of Pluto, where they're approaching the Kuiper Belt area, and that is, there's so many millions of celestial bodies out there, asteroids and small comets. It's really it's quite understandable that they would see moons around Pluto, because Pluto, even though it's a small planet, has enough gravitational force to pull or attract any passing asteroids into its gravitational grip,
But
and keep them captured, and thus they would become captured moons of Pluto.
isn't
So
it
yeah,
isn't it strange how, like, Neptune, they say something's been tugging on it, and tugging on these outer planets, and they say they Pluto don't account for that. So what's doing it?
that's right. I mean, Pluto is so small that it's like there's no way that Pluto, with its small size, could exert any kind of gravitational pull on the larger planets. Actually, it would be just the opposite. The outer planets would pull on Pluto. It's always the larger planet that remains stable, and when it comes in proximity with a smaller planet, it's the smaller planet that gets moved, and the larger planet remains pretty much stable. It's like a big guy fighting a little guy,
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite visual, the relationship. Well, anyway, you're right. If any large outer planets, these are large gas giants, Uranus and Neptune. It takes quite a bit of gravitational pull to move them out of their orbits. And ever since, well, the article is going to go on to say it more eloquently than I could say it.
Okay.
And that is, I'll continue where I left off. We noticed that we mentioned that Pioneer 10 had indeed, even though the government keeps it secret, we have reports that indeed Pioneer 10, its trajectory was budged. It was moved, perturbed out of its trajectory slightly as it passed the calculated point where the scientists, astronomers, and astrophysicists had the solar system. That person should recognize, if he's been around his planet long enough, that this is not the normal weather that we knew when we were children, where you have relatively mild temperate weather during the spring and the summertime. Summertime it gets warm, but it's relatively stably warm. You don't see, you never used to see great excursions of temperature over a short period of time when we were young 20, 30 years ago. Um, Now you see temperature changes of 40 degrees in a matter of hours.
Yeah.
So everyone should know that something's wrong with the Earth, even if they don't want to know about Planet X or they don't want to know about the solar system. They've got to sit up and take notice and start asking questions. Because, for example, if a person has physical maladies, problems, pains in parts of their body, or some kind of abnormal condition, they should check it out and investigate because it's a symptom, an indication that something is wrong with their body. And if they do not attend to it and correct the problem, they could die or their life could be seriously impaired. Likewise, when we see our planet in ill health, going through trauma and convulsions constantly. Incidentally, can you hear me? Am I speaking clearly enough?
Oh, yes, you're perfect
Okay.
tonight.
I've got a better phone this time. I made the mistake of using an old-fashioned phone, thinking that older is better. Well, not with the old phones. But anyway, I'm glad that it's coming through
Me
clearly
too. I
now.
appreciate that. That's yeah, we're great. Sounds awesome.
Good. Uh, so we've got to investigate. Now, what I have studied since the year 2002, and many other people, scientists such as James McCanney and researchers such as Mark Hazelwood and Jason Rand, another researcher who's written a book titled The Return of Planet X, Gilbert Erickson, and there's so many people now. Bob Fletcher is another investigator, has been speaking about Planet X quite a bit. So there are numerous people talking about this problem. This is Earth. We're talking about something that is so great in magnitude, a threat that makes the New World Order look like an anthill. That's how that's how colossal this problem is. The approach of Planet X. Well, I can tell you from research that I've done uh, in looking back into past uh, events 32 years ago, the New York Times published a report